Welcome, everyone, to the Flower Files podcast sponsored by Wildly Native Flower Farm. Here, everyone is welcome to talk with fellow flower lovers, including real perspectives from the farm, the flowers, and me, the florist.
From the messy day-to-day operations down to the details and even business perspectives, this podcast has a little bit of everything to keep it real. We know that life can get crazy and we don't always have the time to spend on what we love, so we are here to help you take a little time to indulge in nature. I'm Liza Getz.
I'm Lizzie Frey, and we are the team that makes this podcast. Every once in a while, we have a couple guests, this business thing, and what we are working with is called life.
Join us as we walk you through how to think outside the box, talk from the farmer's perspective, have honest conversations about florals, and how to run, well, life. So listen in.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, in the podcast section, and any of your other podcast platforms. You can also find us online at wildlynativeflowerfarm.com, and in an easy way, you can look in the show notes, and all of the information will be right there for easy access.
Welcome back to the Flower Files. This podcast is where we explore stories behind the world's most fascinating ingredients. I'm your host, Liza Getz, and today I have a guest I'm super excited to have sit with me. We're diving into something a little rare and ancient and literally golden, and that's saffron. Known as the world's most expensive spice, saffron has a reputation for mystery, beauty, and incredible flavor. So I think, Khalil, you probably know this saffron a little more intimately than most. You're a grower, educator, and you're quite honestly a passionate advocate for that sustainable saffron cultivation. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Liza, and thank you for that really kind and warm introduction. Thrilled to be here.
Super excited that I get to pick your brain. So I'd love to start off with some basics. Listeners who may not know much beyond saffron is that expensive spice. Will you tell me or explain exactly what saffron is?
Yeah, I mean, saffron is a low input cash crop that comes from the crocus family, and it is usually propagated by means of corm, which is kind of like a bulbous-like structure. And traditionally, it's been grown across, the Middle East, especially Iran. And in more recent years, it's really spread its growth across many different countries. Now it's pretty much grown on every continent, of course, with the exception of, perhaps not surprisingly, Antarctica. And it's just such a valuable crop, but also, as you said, spice, because there are so many ways to integrate it into different value-added products, whether medicinally in the herbal medicine sector, all the way to culinary, cosmetics, and so it's always fetched a very high price and value.
Would you say that the method of harvesting is what makes it so high priced? Or do you think it's because it takes so much to actually, a pound of saffron, my God, that is, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, no doubt the major forces driving the high cost and thus high value is the labor required to separate the stigma filaments, which are those sort of crimson red threads, from the rest of the flower, mainly the purple petals as well as the yellow stamen. And so generally speaking, that's why we see countries, like Iran, where they have generally lower wage rates than other westernized, more developed countries in some regards, such as United States, parts of Europe, of course, that are strong producers like Spain, Italy, Greece. And so you tend to find that generally the most, like I said, cost is associated with the post-harvest processing, but indeed there are other portions across the life cycle of saffron that also require tremendous input from farmers, such as sowing the corms into the ground. And if they're growing in an annual as opposed to perennial style, actually digging up the corms also requires some pretty strenuous labor.
Gotcha. Gotcha. It was very satisfying planting them, and then all of a sudden it was an experience for how they grew so quickly, and all of a sudden there was a flower. I was like, oh my gosh. There wasn't much of a warning, I would say, initially. So you have to make sure you have everything ready to go. Like, you have to have that infrastructure really, really ready. So it was fascinating watching the crop grow and see that whole process this year. And then sitting down and looking at the different harvesting methods. I understand it's very labor intensive, but if you're using your fingers as opposed to small tools, I know that that has some clarity and it makes it a cleaner crop, and then there's no oils or anything, like there's no cross contamination that could possibly happen. But wow, talk about a very precise harvesting technique.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up because, many times saffron growers, especially newcomers that don't have a lot of experience with whether crocus species in general or specifically saffron, will get a little bit in over their heads and end up buying, hundreds of thousands of corms to plant across many acres of land. And unfortunately, a lot of these growers obviously end up having to hire a lot of laborers that they didn't expect to have to hire, which obviously, especially in the United States, can impact their bottom line and capacity to actually turn a profit, even break even in some cases. And in other cases, they're just day and night themselves working nonstop for a month or two in October and November. And of course, that's incredibly stressful as well.
I will say there were a couple nights where I would look at the flowers and say, you're not ready now, but if it's sunny today, you might be ready later, but I don't want to wait overnight. So I would go out with headlamps and double check and make sure, because it truly is a peak in the growing cycle, and then it kind of like slows down again. It goes to more of a maintenance style. But I totally have jumped out of any type of natural rhythm here in a conversation. I want you to explain your personal connection. How did you get into the saffron cultivation? Like, what initially drew you to it?
Yeah, excellent question. It's a rather interesting trajectory that, it started back when I was in undergraduate university up in Vermont at Champlain College. And junior year of my studies, I basically was abroad studying about climate change in the Arctic and Iceland and Greenland. And I was hearing about all these exciting plans that a lot of my friends were doing in the summer. And I really didn't have a plan. I was just going to go and enjoy the beautiful Vermont summertime. And after searching and perhaps a little bit of peer pressure, I said, I should probably, inject myself into something useful, whether for the community, for myself, for my career path, etc. So, long story short is I ended up applying, not knowingly, to the University of Vermont. They had an entomology and still have an entomology laboratory for insect research. And that was under Dr. Margaret Skinner. And to my soon-to-be knowledge, they also have the world's first, the first in the United States Center for Saffron Research and Development. And so she said, hey, we have this exciting program. We have a postdoctoral researcher from Iran. His name is Dr. Arash Galagoga Bahani. And I suppose she thought him and I might connect for various reasons. Perhaps her unknowingly that, my parents are originally from Lebanon, so I do understand and speak a little bit of Arabic. But in Iran they speak Farsi, so I don't know if she 100% realized that at the time, but she certainly thought I might be able to help translate and connect with Arash. All this to
Gotcha.
say that that was my first introduction into saffron. Ended up doing a lot of field research and laboratory research with Arash, and he's just ever since been just dear mentor, friend, and colleague.
Hey there, flower friends. We need to talk about something sweet.
Petal Pantry is our new line of floral salts and sugars made from flowers we grow right here at Wildly Native Flower Farm. Think of a pinch of floral sugar on your morning muffin, a sprinkle of floral sugar on your cookies, or a blossom-infused salt to make every weeknight dinner extra fancy.
Best part, it's all natural and made with real farm-grown blossoms.
Treat your taste buds and get 10% off your first order today at wildlynativeflowerfarm.com with the code FLOWERFILES.
Now, let's get back to the show.
Woohoo!
That's amazing. Amazing. It really sounds like serendipity.
Yeah. If not, then I don't know what it is.
Did you finish your doctorate program really focusing on saffron?
So actually, I do not have a doctorate. That was my that was an internship, an unpaid internship in undergrad.
Gotcha.
And then once I finished that and my bachelor's of science in environmental policy and psychology, I then got a master's degree in nutrition and herbal medicine. And then from there, I've been pursuing, hopefully soon to finish at some point, a doctorate in clinical nutrition.
Wow. So the medicinal side really calls to you.
Yeah, which was another sort of just happened to be moment where all these things came together. And, hence the reason we published a book not too long ago where we really dove deep into all the human clinical trial data on saffron, with exception of perhaps, I think maybe 3 or 4 conditions where we didn't cover it extensively. But that was just a beautiful marriage of, academics and then, of course, just this entrepreneurial endeavor for Saffro Systems and the greater, saffron community.
I think one of the things that sets you and your program and your research and everything apart is you speak professionally, as everyone does who has a program, but you have an innate ability to break it down in a way so that it's not overwhelming or intimidating. So you haven't broken it down to such a basic level that people are like, well, this is too basic. But it's at such a digestible level where you kind of look at this mysterious crop that everybody's like, ooh, saffron. It's intimidating initially because, wow, it's really expensive. And then you read the book and you look at all of the different applications for it that are, quite honestly, outside of the traditional culinary use that most people are familiar with. And you really start to dig into some of those medicinal uses. And for me, it was just a page turner of like, wow, wow. I had no idea. And I think that's one of the places that really, really sets you apart from other programs. And like this, you're approachable, you're accessible, you answer questions in layers of things that are just kind. For lack of a better description.
Well, that's much appreciated. It really hits home for us. That's, of course, been our mission at Saffro Systems and more broadly with, of course, the book and indeed you're obviously talking about the Saffron Mastery course as well, where we really tried to go above and beyond, but at the same time, really providing personalized feedback and recommendations to growers, not only, of course, just in Maryland, but across the world, and ensure that we keep it as evidence-based as possible, but not flushing out all of the, let's say, easy to access and implement recommendations by means of scientific jargon and other just, scientific methodologies that could certainly lose many people. Sometimes loses me when I read some of the literature. But at the end of the day, I think that's what it really comes down to is being a filter that can help saffron growers, turn their saffron endeavors into something sustaining, profitable, and of course, incredibly enjoyable.
And beautiful on top of it.
Yeah, most definitely.
Truly beautiful. Okay, so let's jump a little bit into the growing season. What does it take to cultivate high quality saffron from planting to harvest? And I know this is kind of like a dual question here because there's indoor and outdoor growing, which I know are different styles the whole way through. But if you could just explain the quorum, the soil conditions, the overall climate, that tricky flowering period, to kind of talk a little bit about the growing process, and then we'll jump into some of those harvesting things.
Yeah, excellent. I would start with at least differentiating. In the northern hemisphere, saffron is generally harvested between September to November. Generally speaking, October, November are the most common 2 months. And as you kind of hinted at earlier with your own experiences, saffron flowering sort of follows this bell curve where it starts off slow, 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 then starts to speed up, and eventually it hits its zenith. It hits its maximum production where you have the most flowers. And that is generally in a 3 to 4 week period. And again, in the northern hemisphere, October, November. In the southern hemisphere, it's sometimes between March and May. Now, of course, if you're growing indoors, there's a variety of other considerations, which perhaps we can get into later on if you and your audience are interested, because there's certainly a lot more nuance there. But with regards to outdoor production, there's more or less 14 variables, 14 to 15 variables. Some are independent, others dependent, that can be manipulated by the saffron grower to optimize saffron. But generally speaking, if we're just talking about producing saffron, even not forecoming the optimization of production thereof, we have things like sandy loam soil is generally the most optimal in the sense that saffron is really, again, low input, and so doesn't need incredibly fertile soils. Of course, we see with the research and grower experiences that high soil organic matter definitely helps bolster production and productivity of the corms, flowering, and vegetative process. However, it's not necessarily needed to just produce saffron. Otherwise, it's incredibly low input, not just from a nutrition standpoint, but also from an irrigation standpoint. So in semi-arid to arid climates, we're talking about 4 irrigation cycles needed. Again, this is sort of bare minimum, 1 in autumn, a second one thereafter, 30 days, a third one in spring, a fourth one in April to May. With, again, some research depending on how arid the climate is in which the grower is producing saffron, you might need more. Depending on, how porous the soil is. If you have soils that are incredibly clay-like and made of clay structures, then you're gonna.
It's not going to be very
exactly.
happy.
You're gonna increase waterlogging, and that's where we risk saffron being taken out, due to corm rot and other infections and pathogens.
Yeah.
So certainly, those are some of the most important things to account for.
That makes a lot of sense. I initially, when I first started looking at saffron, it was my dad who said, "You ought to look at this." He's like, "You already grow flowers." I was like, I can't grow saffron." And he was like, "No, really, you ought to look at this." And I was like, "Okay, Dad." And then the one day he was like, "Have you looked at that yet?" I was like, yeah, I'm going to look at it. I sat down and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we can grow this here. We can grow this." And he's like, "I told you to look at it." I had no idea because I assumed that everything had to be hot and dry and, we wouldn't hit all of the things that it needed.
Right.
So it's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And as you said, that bell curve of just, it's like you look and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, they're like all here now. Like pick, go.
Always have to get the team ready.
And then when it comes, oh yeah, get them prepared, get them lined up. All right, we're going to be here. You got to be here early and we're going to go. And everything is handpicked. It's not like you come through with clippers. I mean, it is a very, very, very specific. I have found that if I pick too low, it doesn't remove as easily, but if I pick too high, then it doesn't sit correctly. So there's definitely a learning curve there, but then learning about the drying methods and what are some of the rules and regulations about what a commodity is and what some of the inputs are and all of the different drying styles, that has been fascinating. So the whole process has been amazing, absolutely amazing. So I would love for you to explain just a little bit about how you identify real saffron versus fake saffron, because my fingers were orange from the saffron, but my fingers also turn orange from marigolds. So how do you make sure that what you have, if you're a buyer, is actually true saffron?
Yeah, much obliged for that question and excellent identification of marigold as having somewhat similar properties, especially with regards to the dyeing properties when you go to harvest it, because indeed we see marigold among other plants being very common in the adulteration of saffron in the whole process of broadening the spice. And so there are a lot of things to look for. The first thing that should be generally, if you're a consumer, don't buy powdered saffron. Generally, powdered saffron is more easy to adulterate. A, B, it is of generally lower quality, even if it is true pure saffron, just due to the way that the chemical constituents in saffron preserve amongst various conditions and don't preserve in others. Otherwise, like you hinted at, true saffron, when it's fully dried, actually, when you rub it in your hands, it should produce a slight yellow, but it shouldn't be as significant as, for example, a fresh saffron that hasn't been dried, or a saffron sigma filament that has been placed in water, should dissipate its yellow color, which is predominantly crocin, a chemical compound in saffron, slowly and evenly, whereas commonly adulterated saffron will spread very quickly, and generally you'll see spotting, which of course is attributable in this case to other dyes, for example, being added to saffron post-harvest, even if it is hopefully real saffron. In some cases they use, for example, in some of the most scandalous cases, especially even in Europe, you find dried meat fibers, for example, that have been dyed with, a synthetic yellow dye or orange dye or red dye even to make it look like saffron. So there's certainly a lot of trickery around there, and staying ahead of the game can be difficult. The last thing I'll just mention, because I know you wanted me to keep this a little bit brief on the identification of true saffron versus fake, is if you do get to testing it, it should have a slight metallic flavor to it, which might throw people off who don't know about saffron, but generally its aroma, once it's been properly dried, has been described as, a honeysuckle, hay-like aroma. Yet we see across studies that the longer you store saffron, the aroma profile actually shifts. So that can be a little bit tricky as a single, let's say, handed test of authenticity.
Interesting. That's a great description with honeysuckle, because it's kind of similar in where the parts of the flower come from. Okay. So if someone listening is thinking, I want to grow saffron, what's your advice?
In the United States, or where are we starting?
That's a good clarifying question. Let's go United States, although I do have quite a few folks who check in from other places around the world. But let's do United States for right
Yeah, if
now.
I was going to consider United States as a first-time grower, depending on the location geographically in the United States, I would say, for starters, start small and start slow. That
Mhm.
way, just as you hinted at throughout our conversation today, there are so many learning curves when it comes to saffron. And if you don't have a guide with you, if you're not part of the Saffron Mastery course, for example, or don't have your hands on a book like Saffron from Fields to Fortune, then
That's what they should start with.
sure, that would be a great start. But I would say, for growers that want to just get their hands on the crop and get involved without necessarily doing their due diligence, I would suggest starting small, right? And that way they can get just
Mhm.
an understanding of the actual processes involved in saffron. And of course, there will be failures and successes, and understanding how to keep track of those, I think will pay dividends forward. I'm a strong believer you can, read and hear and learn as much as you want, but until you actually do something physically, you're not going to necessarily learn as fast or as, uh,
Mhm.
in an adaptive manner, because every farm
Agreed.
situation is slightly different. And so we can always give the most, comprehensive general feedback for growers, but any one small variable of 14, 15 different variables might make that situation for that farmer different than the rest who are receiving that information. So I would certainly say start small, do a hobby plot. Ideally, you could even do something where, for example, you're growing in, a potted saffron, a potted
Hmm.
milk crate, for example, could also be used. That way, you can also easily transport it depending on your climate conditions. If it's too wet, you're in a climate, let's say down south. We've even had growers interested from Hawaii, of all places, to grow
Hmm.
saffron. And indeed, humidity, rainfall, all these things need to be considered. So, just being able to even just grow saffron in a very small room inside the house, for example, could be very useful for, let's say, a first time grower, just to understand the different parts of the life cycle, how to pick the saffron, harvest it, and then process it, dry it. Of course, there are so many different methodologies there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the two things that I took away from all of your instructions, teachings, from the course to the book to everything that I've digested, I really think one of the things that struck me, and it makes sense, and you do have a source for it, was making sure that your corms are quality. That goes without saying, but to me it was so like, well, duh. I want to do this, I want to grow this. My gosh, where do I source this? And I was so grateful that you guys had that as a resource. And the other thing that I took away from all of your instruction was patience. Be patient, be kind, and know that it's okay that you're learning. And I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I think that is probably, no matter the entrepreneurial project or, topic, being patient and willing to learn is not a, you know it's a requirement. It's not a option. And so that applies specifically to saffron, perhaps even more so than other ventures and other crops as well. I will say certainly that we were kind of blessed with our capacity to partner with the Rocco Saffron, who is based out of the Netherlands. The president there, Hans, is a dear friend and colleague of mine, and they just are so meticulous and they pay thus so much attention to detail when it comes to their processes for harvesting and separating and processing saffron corms. And so they've always been, in my opinion, one of the best out there. And indeed, to your point, especially in places like India, Iran, who are more traditional saffron producers, we see some of the biggest barriers to the sustainability of the markets they're in isn't just related to climate change and irrigation issues, but it's also the access to viable offspring corms to plants. So it shouldn't be something that is overlooked.
That was huge. I mean, and they came and they were beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So it's excellent.
Glad to hear that.
So if people want to find you and they want to take your class, or they want to, and it's not even a class, they want to be part of the entire coursework, or they want to grab your book, where would you send people?
Yeah, I would send people to saffrosystems.com, SAFFRO systems.com. We have all of the links to Amazon for Saffron from Fields to Fortune, the book. Of course, the course, which comes with the community, and indeed all of our social media links and email newsletter. So that would certainly be the easiest way to get involved. And as you know, Liza, I'm very accessible. Of course, I always leave time each day to make sure I can respond to every single grower, especially through our community, and all of the course enrollees have access to me directly. So I certainly pride myself and the community and my team, of course. It's not a one-man show, to be able to support everyone, as quickly as possible.
Your response time is phenomenal, but it's also thoughtful. I've never felt intimidated to ask you a question, and I am beyond grateful for that. So thank you.
You're most welcome. And I hope you keep the questions coming.
Well, Khalil, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing your passion and expertise with us today. And to our listeners, if you're inspired to try saffron in your cooking, or maybe even grow it yourself, you can check out the links in the show notes for more information specifically about Khalil's work. Thank you for listening to our flavor journey today. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next time as we explore more ingredients from around the world. Until then, stay curious and stay flavorful.